white fragility, and I'm the one who even showed you that article in the first place. Wait. But is she gonna say fuck you again? Should I apologize or laugh it off? Who's to say it's the Meg show?
Okay, so just for my own clarification, you don't actually want to have a real conversation. You just wanted me to rub your belly and say, don't fret about slavery. You're a good person, hot stuff, and then we go back to eating chow fun, right?
Welcome to Radical Listening. I'm your host, Phil Johnson.
And I'm your co-host, Clifton Holtznagel. Today we sat down with two people from the production of Redwood, the production's director, Chip Miller, and the playwright and star herself, Brittany K. Allen.
Yeah, we talked about the show, we talked about the process, and we talked at length about how Brittany formed this piece.
We talked about the industry. We talked about NYU. It turns out they both went to college together, just as Phil and I went to college together. So it was kind of fun because a lot of times the two of us have a lot of jokes and inside things that are going on while other people are in the dark. And this time we both had that going on. Both sets of two people had inside jokes. So it was just fun to hear them catch up. Both very smart, interesting people, and I think you'll hear that.
Yeah, for sure. They definitely had a lot to say about working in theater and coming from New York theater. And
we talked with Brittany about what it was like to workshop her show as the playwright and the lead actor.
Yeah, and the reading that they did at Kansas City Repertory Theater. And ultimately, it was just a really great conversation. These two people are very charismatic and great talkers, and they have a lot of really good ideas about theater and identity, and this conversation will show that. I think this is one of the longer episodes, but it's definitely worth it.
Stick through all the way to the end, and a lot of fun stuff comes out.
And so here's our interview with Brittany K. Allen and Chip Miller.
The new play Redwood is currently making its world premiere at Portland Center Stage through November 17th. Today we're sitting down at Coho Productions with the show's playwright and star, Brittany K. Allen, and the show's director, Chip Miller. Brittany, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing wonderful. How about you, Chip?
I can't complain.
Good.
We're all here.
You're all here. And this is your co-host, Philip Johnson, everybody.
Yeah.
Off to a good start.
No, great. So it's great to have you guys here. We've been talking about this for a little while, but this is fun. And we've kind of had a conversation rolling here, but I'd like to just dive into Redwood and just, here we are. We're a couple weeks into the run. How do you feel about the show?
Ooh. I feel great. I'm having fun. Yeah, I think it's grown a lot. I'm excited for you to see it after a week away, Chip.
I'm so excited to see it. I'm so excited by it because it's that thing of make the theater you want to see, and everything that's in Redwood is all of the things that I'm interested in. And so to get to work on a play that allows for that is a gift.
That's great. So I was actually thinking earlier today, I want to know what the genesis moment was for this play. Like, when did you say, oh, I want to write a play about, you know, either the relationship or ancestry? Like, how did this all start?
Well, it's hard to divide into two moments because there were two influencing autobiographical things that went into the play. One was, real story, I have an aunt who became really interested in charting my family's genealogy.
Okay.
She's not like Uncle Stevie. I always feel compelled to add in case my family's like listening, but yeah, I have an aunt who did a big deep dive into Ancestry.com and started turning up all of these, by turns, upsetting and also really exciting pieces of information. And she did write to our family and try to get everybody really involved and excited. And I clocked resistance from some members of the family. So that was just that conundrum led to the character of Uncle Stevie. And then the other prong of it is when I started writing the play, I was in an interracial relationship with a white gentleman, and we would have these really tricky conversations. The one I think of in particular was shortly after Mike Brown died, and I remember I had this like very emotional, you know, the reaction a lot of people had and a lot of Black people had, but I I picked this big fight with my partner about it because he just wasn't reacting to this the way that I like, and I felt really aware of like a paucity of Black people in my life that I needed to have around me to process this with or something. And it was it was sort of the influence of scene 5 in the play, this big fight that the couple has, where it was not really about anything, but it was just about like rage and like, what is it to be in this relationship where I feel like I won't ever be able to fully delve into this part of myself with you in a moment when it feels so pronounced. So that was the genesis of like Meg and Drew as a couple. But it's evolved a lot and incorporates some other things now. But
yeah. So when you had that moment, that's when you started writing the play, or when did the play actually start?
It would be disingenuous to say that. I started writing it chronologically. So the first scene I wrote was the one with Uncle Stevie in the dance studio. And that just like came to me in a burst in most of the first Meg and Mom scene. And I wrote those pretty close to each other. Mm-hmm. And then I kept the play in a drawer and didn't really know how to get into it until I had this fight with my then partner. Mm-hmm. And then it unspooled from there. Yeah.
So how long ago was that?
Let's see. I was 25, I think. So that was some years ago.
You're already doing that. Come on, millennials don't do that.
Yeah, I know. It was 4 years ago. Yeah. No, it's hard though. It's weird to build a play and be like, oh right, they take so much work.
Oh yeah.
There's so many iterations of it, and so many like versions in my head. I'm like, when did that happen? But
and I heard that had something to do with how you named it Redwood, because here I am in the Pacific Northwest and I go to see a new play called Redwood. I'm like, this must be something about the Northwest.
Oh no.
Not quite. But that's interesting. So could you talk about how you came to the title?
Oh, sure. Well, to be perfectly honest with you, wonderful people, and this is like a sellout-y thing to say, but I work with my titles tend to be kind of impressions, you know? I'm just like, oh, this is the word that I keep coming back to, and I can't think of a better one, and it's stuck now, and I can't fix it. But I came to Redwood because like the essential playness of the play to me is Uncle Stevie building the family tree and it being this tangled, messy, mammoth thing. And so the largest trees in America seemed like a fitting title, like as a visual. And before even this production, which involves redwoods in a way I shan't disclose, but yeah, the visual of the tree was very important to how I was thinking about the play while I was writing it. Yeah. Although I learned just this week, my parents have been on like a tour of the Pacific Northwest. Apparently, they were like, "Yo, we've been in wine country for a week before we see." I was like, "What are you doing?" But they went and toured in California, a pod of redwoods and the forest there. And they were telling me all this amazing history that they learned, which I'm like, it ought to have behooved me to have known about this much earlier. But like how they grow in pods, these trees, and they're incredibly resilient, and a lot of them are resistant to fires in a way that it's not true of a lot of other trees in the Pacific Northwest, because of what they carry, and then of course how old they are and how huge. And I thought that was so fascinating. I was like, right, all this stuff is like dovetails in the metaphor.
I took a class in college called American Forests, and I learned a lot about trees. I just called the class Trees. And we talked about redwoods too, and how when they're not babies, but when they're kind of mid-sized trees, they almost have to burn because it makes the outside of the bark or something like stronger. And I always thought that was really interesting, because if they don't burn, then they're actually weaker and they can't stand up, they can't grow as tall.
I love that.
Yeah. So when did you become a part of this process, Chip? Because it seems like you guys know each other or have known each other for a while or something.
We've known each other for a little while. We did our undergrad together at NYU.
Okay, there it is.
At the Playwrights Horizon studio. And got to play around sometimes. We were part of one or two theater companies that some still exist in different iterations, in very different iterations. But Redwood was on the Kilroy's list in 2017, and at the time, I was working as the assistant artistic director at Kansas City Rep, and Marissa Wolf was the director of new works there. And whenever the Kilroy's list came out, I was like, oh, let's just go through this and find the plays that are super interesting, because we would do these readings. And it was this incredible series where once a month we would get a play and bring it to a reading. We would have like a week where it was all the actors bring the playwright in, just get to spend time working on the play. And I read the description of Redwood and I thought, I know a Brittany Allen. I'm going to try to get that script. And so I got the script and I read it. And I think I texted you like as soon as I finished it, and I was just like, oh my God. Oh my God, this play. I was like 2 months off of a breakup that was an interracial relationship, and had been having a lot of thoughts about what is it to be a Black partner in an interracial relationship with a white partner, and the ways in which it was the year after Trump's election, and that like feeling of all of these things that are hard to talk about and hard to explain. And I like my partner at the time was incredible, and still there was just this like space between us that I couldn't quite reconcile. And then this play came along, and I every third page I was taking screenshots and sending it to friends and saying like, oh my God, this play is talking about things in a way that I didn't know you could talk about them. And then Brittany responded to my text and was like, yeah, that's my play. And I emailed it to Marissa and I was like, we have to do a reading of this play. And so that would probably be like October, November of 2017. And we did a reading of it in Kansas City in January of 2018.
Okay.
How much has it changed since then?
Oh man, I think a lot. What do you think?
Quite a bit. I still have that reading draft on my desk at my office. And,
oh my God.
I've gone back to it.
You look back at it like, what is this?
I read through that draft before the first rehearsal because I was like, what is the gap we're bridging? What is all of this time and what has happened? I remember at that workshop I gave you a really bad note, and
What?
I remember it so clearly. I gave you a note of like, she needs to have conversations with her friends.
Oh no! No, but that stuck with me. I don't think that was a bad note at all.
That's kind of hilarious because ultimately the conversations that she has with her friends is that really quick moment where they're like, I'm sorry, I can't talk to you because I'm in love right now.
Yeah. I think that note actually sparked for me a little bit more specifying in Meg's character. It's funny, I was talking to my aunt the other day who came to see the show, and she mentioned that she thought like, oh, Meg, the character, like, is quite selfish, right? And I was like, well, that I did write some of that, but she had a very strong, like, she reads as quite selfish to me in a way that's like fun, and I'm with it, but like, I was like, oh. And I don't know, the more time passes with this play, I do think like the character of Meg is pretty specifically early to mid 20s in a way that I begin to recognize from a distance as like, oh, it is that moment when you're just like so wrapped up in your business that like she's neglecting some other things in her life, right? Her mom's well-being. And I think there is, I don't know, at least I'll only speak for myself, but my experience, the selfishness is kind of integral to the conflict in the play. And I wouldn't call it selfishness necessarily, but
they're blinders.
Yes,
in that way of
that's
when
the
you're
blinder.
like in your early 20s and trying to figure out, who am I?
Yeah.
Period. I mean, not that we ever really figure out who we are, but I feel like that post-college, first real job, first major relationship moment is, oh, I'm trying to forge an identity. And that's such a difficult behemoth task that I have to turn off everything else around me so that I can focus on me and the things that you miss.
Yeah.
Just because you're trying to become a person.
Or you're like, here, I have this identity. How did I get it?
Yeah.
Where did this come from?
Yeah.
There's something interesting about being post-college too, because you just kind of went through a whirlwind of information gathering and
Trees.
identity crisis and trees. And yeah, and well,
Hella
but I think
trees.
that, and even like, substance influences the way you think. So you're coming off of this kind of fantasy world where you're kind of trying to piece things together, and the next thing you know, you're kind of thrown into the real world. And so the way that you answer questions is totally different than, even 5 years later.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, where do you think Meg ends up in the end of this play? What is she thinking about? How does she feel about Drew then?
That's a beautiful question. Oh, man. Huh. I think so the scene just before the paint and sip scene you're talking about is certainly the way in this, it is a reconciliation of a kind. And we have Meg and Drew come back together, and I think it's pretty implied that they will, spoiler alert, keep doing this work, or attempt to do this work together, and they renew their commitment to each other in a new way. So I think at Paint and Sip, she has landed in a place that's more like, okay, I begin to see the meat of what building a relationship actually looks like and the effort it will take. But I'm here to do it, and I'm here with my partner. I brought him. Look, Mom, and look, Uncle.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like, to the extent that there's a resolution to that character, that's her landing place, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But wait, I want to make sure I'm answering your full question.
So she believes him when he does the grand gesture.
Yeah.
Now,
Or she decides to, or yeah.
mm-hmm.
And there is this sense of something I love about this play is there's a lot of conflict in it, but almost all of the conflict are things that are happening internally for these characters.
Mm-hmm.
We see Stevie talk to a person, like actually talk to a person, maybe 3 times in the play, because
Oh, God.
so much of it is living in this online, internal, editing emails that I'm going to send to a group of people world, and how we process our thoughts alone.
Mm-hmm.
And so the resolution doesn't want to come out of like and the world was changed. No, it's, oh, I know how to wake up tomorrow morning.
Mm.
I know how to be in this relationship. I know how to begin having the conversation of myself as to what perspective on my lineage is.
Mm-hmm.
The conflicts feel huge because inside of ourselves, every conflict feels huge. I mean, the thing I struggle with the most is how to not make the conflicts in my life feel so large, because they're generally small, but my mind immediately goes to, oh God, I ruined that thing, and like I'm gonna spend the next 48 hours beating myself up over that like one mistake that no one else notices, but inside for me it is a 3-act drama where it's just, oh, this is the worst thing that's ever happened.
Yeah.
And none of the characters are actually in conflict with each other. They're in conflict with themselves. And when you're in conflict with yourself, it's so hard to put that on yourself. So you look for the person closest to you and say, well, it's your fault. Like I need to get this out some way. And if I just keep it inside, it's never going to be able to mature because it's just in this echo chamber. But if I put it out on you, at least
Now
I'll
you have to respond.
You have to, and I have a release.
Right.
Even if it's the thing that I wanted causes additional problems.
Right.
At least it's not living in here anymore.
I love that read of the play so beautifully, Chip. Thank you. And
Records
yeah.
before, right?
Yeah. And I do think it is interior. I appreciate the underlining that it's interior. I think Meg leaves the play being more comfortable, not in this obfuscating mom space, or like, I think she's going to leave this play less inclined to like joke her way through situations and to try to explain them to her partner. Yeah, I think it's an internal maturing to the extent that there's character development.
Well, there's the thing that Meg says in that penultimate scene with Drew where they're in the process of reconciling, and she talks about a microaggression that she experiences, and she says, yes, it's horrible, but it's not horrible, but yeah, it's horrible. And I think that
that's one of my favorite lines in the play.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
That stuck with me too.
I use that so frequently to describe
It's
moments.
just so well said.
Because
as a young person, I think that way all the time, because even trying to make that statement in a more complex way is too complex. it's just like, yeah, it's like horrible. Like this thing, you know, it went out and this guy cut me off in traffic, and the way he looked at me, it wasn't like the worst thing. It wasn't, you know, I love the way that's phrased. It's just, it's very clear.
It's a thing. I was telling you the story earlier about going to see a play and being mistaken for one of the black actors in the play, and like walking out of the theater and just being like, no, I have purple hair. Like, what makes you think that I was that guy? And it's horrible, but it's not horrible. But yeah, it's horrible. Like, and just
Constant
even
modulating.
Yeah.
Even her being able to articulate that is articulate an unspeakable thing. Of that's what it is. It's not a play that's like, this is the solution to how to live in interracial relationships, because every relationship is different. Like there are no two relationships you can put together and say there's an analog. But ultimately this is how this couple is able to go to tomorrow and continue asking questions. They won't have answers. They have like, this is how we navigate it together. But at the end of the day, they have a lifetime ahead of them of moments that are horrible, but not horrible, but yeah, horrible.
Yeah.
So one thing I wanted to talk to you about was the ending of the play has changed, even just in the process that I have been a part of several times. And I want to know what that fine-tuning meant to you. And was that ultimately something that was kind of a thought process that you had been working on for a while? Was it something that once you saw it on its feet, you were like, this is what needs to change? Or was it kind of a new revelation?
I want to say a lot of the fine-tuning that happened during this process was the product of revelations and really great questions and being challenged to articulate the gesture of the ending. Because it really, for a very long time, it was just a gesture. Like, I knew what I wanted. It felt really important to me that we got to hear some version of the ancestors weigh in on this present-day world. In large part because the play is structured like a comedy and there's so much levity around these very serious issues, and it felt important to me as a playwright to be like, but don't get it twisted, like slavery. But so that I knew I wanted to hear their voices, and I had this chorus, and it occurred to me probably between two early drafts that they ought to be braided into each other and serve the same function. And this idea that the ancestors are with us always sort of embedded that structuring. But for the drafts of the play, between that revelation and up to like first day of rehearsal here, the ancestors' squabble was sort of dwelling in this place of like, people just come out and get to speak their like exposition as characters, and it wasn't really like scratching the itch of what we're left with, I think, at the end of Painted Sip after Stevie's big toast, invoking them, right? This like seance play thing, to borrow a Sarah Holdren term. Like, so what? Anyway. I say with love, Sarah Holdren's amazing. I'm so sad she's leaving Vulture.
Left.
I know.
Heartbreak.
Very sad. She's a great critic. Anyway, it would, for some reason, those two pieces did not, like, the ancestor coda was not really answering the questions raised in the Stevie monologue. So it became about asking like why they had to, what they needed to say more specifically, other than just here's my autobiographical statement. And so I kind of reverse engineered from the text of Stevie's toast. Like he's asking, or he's implying that they would have had this, you know, benediction to give about the people in the present day, but they come in to set the record straight, which is like was the gesture initially, really. So it was a fine tuning, and it was a precisifying, I think, of what has always been the same vague idea. But yeah.
And so then where did the cellular pain come from?
Oh, that's a great question too. I don't remember when that became a part of this arithmetic, but I mean, this idea of inherited trauma and what we carry is kind of like baked into the play. Yeah. And even before I quite became cognizant of like the real science behind that term, it was something that floated through with this impulse to like have ancestors in it at all. And like the very act of conjuring them, the act of making this somewhat distant historical event personal, like I think it necessitates that in this moment when we do have the language of epigenetics and what so. Yeah. I can't say when that became a part of it. That's to say. But I'm loving the conversations I'm having with people with that frame on the play of the inherited trauma, because I think it's a very articulate reason for why they come in at the end, I think, that I didn't have at all.
Well, you know, so much of the weight of the understanding of this play is put on the interracial relationship and kind of understanding that dynamic. But ultimately, what I felt the most deeply about was the cellular trauma. So ultimately, my biggest takeaway was not the dynamics of interracial dating, but the idea that our ancestors, which kind of live in the space around us all the time, directly impact our decision making in our life. You know, the question the mom asks, how does this affect you right now? And Meg is not educated enough to answer that this lives in my body.
Now we have like a scientific reason why it does. It's not just like a philosophical thing. And I've been hearing a lot about that science too lately, about how that, like, you know, a famine can affect, you know, a whole generation's DNA, and that's what they pass on, is this, like, you know. So super interesting stuff.
Rage. We had the most I'm spacing on her name just now, but we had a really fascinating dialogue after one of the shows last week. A local therapist who specializes in a lot of inherited trauma work, like, spoke to people about this. It was just really exciting.
Yeah.
Ruby Joy was the moderator, but I don't remember the lady's name. Anyway, gang, hit me up in the comments. I'll find out.
Like and subscribe.
Dragged in the comments.
Oh, man.
So you guys have obviously been doing this thing for a while in New York. You went to NYU for it. How did you guys get started? Are you theater, you know, high school theater nerds? How did you get into theater? Chip, we'll start with you.
Growing up, my older cousin used to do impressions of everyone in the family, and his impression of my mom was always, "Who wants to go to a play?" And so my mom just took me to a lot of theater as a kid. I remember seeing Beauty and the Beast in the movie theaters, and like hearing stories of like me at 3 just like performing Cinderella on the staircase for babysitters, and just like at 4 I got a puppet theater for Christmas, and it was just always, this is the thing. This is where I want to be. And I started doing theater when I was like 5 or 6, and just never looked back. And it gave me community in a time when I didn't know it was the thing I craved. And I look back at, I mean, I've been doing theater for almost 25 years, and almost all of my life is slotted into, I was working on that show at that time, and that's what was going on. Right. And it's always been home in a way, and it every day becomes home even more. And then like there came the moment of like, in high school I started directing plays and was given this platform to be able to start I directed a James Baldwin play when I was 15, and
of course you did.
I directed Tennessee Williams. I was starting to get to like dig into these writers and Chekhov, and just being able to see myself reflected in a way that felt so much more immediate than film ever did. And then getting to college, and I mean, do you remember that list of 100 plays that they sent us that we had to read before freshman year?
What?
I wish I still had that.
I wish I still had it. I'm like,
we went to state school. We didn't have that.
No shade.
It was probably from like somebody's blog.
I'm guessing.
No shade.
But everyone, the thing that I kept being told about Playwrights Horizons was, it's just theater boot camp, and getting this list of your summer reading is the 100 most important plays ever written. And really, like, the thing that catalyzed on that list for me, and it was very fortunate in timing, was Sarah Kane's Blasted was on the list. And
you were in that.
I did that show a few years ago. Yeah, I was the soldier.
I did the soldier in like scene work in college.
Yeah,
it's a beast of a
bitch of a thing. And then you
I
lie
saw
on
a lot
stage
of you
for
that
15s.
I wonder how intimacy directors are dealing with that right now.
Right?
It was,
What would it be
it
like
was
to do that
interesting.
show?
Yeah, we had an
Oh,
intimacy director for that a couple years ago,
Huh.
and
Awesome.
she did well. Kristen Munn, actually.
Oh,
Did she
amazing.
work on that one? She worked. I don't know.
She
I know
didn't work
works
on Redwood, but yeah, she's
around. Yeah, yeah.
residence at
Mhm.
PCS.
Yeah. Anyways.
But you know, and it was very fortunate that that fall Soho Rep did the New York premiere of Blasted. And I remember going to see that play, and I was waiting in line to rush it, and it snowed. And it was the first time it had snowed since I moved to New York. And then I saw the play, and it was just this overwhelming experience of, oh, it has to be theater. It has to be. And we were lucky enough to have like really great teachers who were all doing exciting work and are continuing to do exciting work, who said really smart things to me. I had a teacher say to me, you should work on new plays. Ultimately, at the end of the day, being taught, always ask the question, never presume the answer, because most of my professional career has just been, I sent someone an email and said, hey, I want to work with you. And they said yes. Of most of the closed doors are the doors that you've never tried to open. And so just trusting, oh, okay, I have talent. I have a skill set. I have a knowledge base. And maybe someone will want to work with me. And one day one of those doors will open. And fortunately, I've been lucky enough to have a lot of doors open.
Yeah. Brittany, so how did you get into this?
Always locked.
I mean, same dorky beginnings in a lot of ways.
What's your earliest theater experience?
I had a theater company when I was 8 called Cousins and Company that I
hell
formed
yeah.
around a family vacation.
Shut up.
Our first production I wrote was it was an adaptation of the movie Arachnophobia.
Yes.
Amazing.
Yes, it was the director. It was like the first time I'd met a lot of my cousins, and legend has it that I like showed up at this like family beach house and distributed scripts and said, "Hello, this is what we'll be doing this week."
I'm your cousin and director.
Yeah. So, and that was like that was a big part of my life for my early childhood. We did another production of mine, A Christmas Carol adaptation, and
Oh, beautiful.
an original piece called Dreams, which was probably pretty didactic in hindsight. The Wizard of Oz.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are there copies
True
of these
Yeah,
scripts?
where
that
are these
You know,
exist?
my mother probably has them. I'm gonna find some.
Last year
Publish.
for Christmas, my mother gave me a framed photo that was from Chip age. The date means I was 5 years old, and it was a ticket that I had written to a production I staged in our backyard. And it was like also a letter. So I was like, Jordan and I made this play. Jordan is my younger brother, who at the time would have been 2.
Right.
We say hello, and here is your admittance to the play.
Oh
It is
my
at 8
God.
p.m.
Oh, gosh.
How freaking cute. I
Me and
bet
my-
we were just dreams for our parents to be these theater kids and have to be driven around to rehearsals all the
Yeah.
time. Yeah. But I just follow that through. I did drama in high school. Very similar, really. I followed the fire all the way through Rent and
Yeah, me
my
too.
problematic coming to it as a 90s kid with not full understanding of the heft of the AIDS crisis. Yeah.
But great music.
Jesus, beautiful music. Much more to say about that.
Much more.
Yeah. Then I went to NYU and yeah.
Wow. Rest is history.
The rest is history.
Wow. That's great. So like what keeps you engaged in theater? Why do you keep making theater at this point?
Well, I echo a lot of, I think that your experience at Blasted remains the dream, but also the reality. If like you become a person who lives in theater, then you see it a lot. And I think those experiences become a little more rare, of course, but as your palate and your understanding of how the sausage gets made develops. But like I've still had just the most amazing experiences of my life at like my last favorite things I've seen, that They do shock you in a way that film doesn't. It's immediate. It's so visceral. You're like in this breathless, dark room with people. It's just my jam. It's my favorite still.
It very much is a seance, you know?
Yeah.
And it's that thing that changes
At its best.
when you become someone who sees a lot of theater. Like I think everyone at this table
Mm.
sees a lot of theater. And I mean, like, it's really hard for me to turn off director brain. And
Right.
so most theater I see, I'm like, not redirecting it, but I'm
Sure.
redirecting it in my head.
Watch out, Portland.
But no,
He's here now. I'm just fucking with you. It's cool.
I'm blushing. Maybe.
Ease up now.
But no, once you become a practitioner, I go and see so much theater only because it is a reminder that what we do is hard and there's no wrong way to do it. And so you go and see theater. And for me, like, when I get in the room, it's like, how do I do this?
Mhm.
Like, it's so hard every time because you're just making something out of nothing. Like, at the beginning of a rehearsal process, you have a blueprint in the script and collaborators, and then the hope is like, we're gonna make a real life thing.
We all know how to do this, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it always feels so like you have no idea what's going to happen.
Yeah,
at
it
the
is
beginning
so
of every
different
process.
Every process.
And
And
so
you don't know
going-
how it's going to unfold.
You never. And I mean, like, this process, I could not have told you that it would feel like this now
Mhm.
5 weeks ago. Like, I truly had no idea what was going to come because it's different every time. But I love going to see theater because it's a reminder that there is no wrong way to do it. You made that choice. Why? It's not the choice I would have made. And then those transcendent pieces of theater where you're watching it and it ends and you're like, I didn't spend any time thinking about anything other than being inside the story.
Mhm.
And how overwhelming that can be. What it is to actually be taken somewhere and to know that in every moment of the play, your hand was held by the creators and that you were just guided on this journey through this world that is foreign. I keep thinking about A Strange Loop.
I was going to say something about A Strange Loop. Yeah. What you just said made me think of this idea of totality, right? Like, yeah, what even today in our attention brains, you go to a movie even, you can still find ways to be distracted. People have their phones out, whatever. And this is not a big thing on theater etiquette, I swear, but because fuck that shit. But like, seeing A Strange Loop recently, it was like, this is what it feels like to be inside of a head. And that play like sucked up all of my attention and did not leave me wanting, and I was surprised at every moment of it. It was just, and it is to do with being in a room with people and like aware of what's happening in front of you is live and ephemeral, and like he's really doing that up there. Like there's this, and even the wildest, best, wonderful movies I've seen, it's like you still have this layer of remove. Like everyone's really going to be fine because the movie came out and was edited, but like that like breathless, real worry about actual people in front of you, something that can only happen in theater. So
yeah.
I was at Orlando Shakes for a playwriting festival this weekend, and one of the plays that was done had a lot of magic in it, and we were just having lots of conversations about part of the beauty of it is like there was a question of should this be turned into a film because it's structured very well for a film, and the playwright said no, because in film magic doesn't mean anything. But in a room with people, magic is,
you've got to do it.
You got to do it, and I think that good theater is just magic.
Oh, totally.
It's just, I mean, I grew up as I am still a deep fan of musical theater, and part of what I think has always attracted me to musical theater is that at the end of the day, those performers have done that thing. They have run that marathon. They actually had to do all of those dances, hit all of those notes, be in all of those formations, say all of those lines, feel all of those things. And because musical theater is so heightened, it's just like, you do that 8 times a week. You do that 8 times a week, and you're just showing me yourself. And I think that all great theater does that. I try to say on every play I work on, if you're not exhausted at the end, you've done it wrong. Because to be an actor it's hard work. You're just making yourself vulnerable for a bunch of people to find a moment of catharsis. Like you're just a conduit. And so, and there's the beauty in the theater of, and we're breathing the same air. Of, something could go wrong. Usually something does go wrong. And how do you keep going? There is, I always like to say, we don't make products, we make processes that can be repeated, because no two performances of a play will ever be the same.
Oh, and I love that too.
Oh,
That's so fun on the inside, right?
That's what's fun about long runs too. Is I just came off a show that had like a 5-week run, and it was like kind of hectic getting it open. And then people were like, "Oh, we kind of like this show." We're like,
Yeah.
"Great!" And then you got to do whatever you wanted with it after that. It was so much fun. So much fun. Just took it even deeper. That's what's I love those long runs.
Directors love hearing that.
Well, if you stop coming to the shows,
Never
anything can
mind.
happen.
I was about to say.
That's why Brittany said she was excited for you to see it again.
But it's that thing of like, I mean,
But we're
Redwood
like
has.
comfy in it in a way that's exciting.
totally,
You're just like,
totally.
I got
Yeah,
the reviewer,
like,
whatever.
Become comfortable, and then you get to know more about it and understand things you didn't know before.
Yeah.
It's just amazing.
And I mean, like, Redwood has an amazing stage manager, and
Yes.
Jamie Lynn, and they've sent me some emails of like, hey, like, this is where the show's living. These are some changes that have been made. Like, how do you feel about it? And it's that thing of course, like, that's what happens. You can't
it's a process.
You can't
Yeah.
do anything for. The goal is not for it to be exactly the same every time. The goal is for it to keep the ball in the air. And how you keep the ball in the air is going to be different every time, because you're a different person today than you are going to be tomorrow, and then you were yesterday. And so,
and the audience is different too, and not just physically you have different people, but it's always been interesting to me, especially with music, like going to see live music, how current events affect performances. Because you come off of an interesting or devastating current event, it changes the entire energy in the room, especially in a live event. Like if you're seeing a play, the actors are different, their energy is different, the way the audience responds is different, and we're still all in this room together to make this thing happen. And so it's probably, I don't know if anything big has happened since we've opened Redwood, other than impeachment and proceedings.
but I mean, like, I
everything.
guess at the there's something really interesting of like making theater in the last 2.5 years, really, of like since Trump's inauguration. I remember very much. I was working on a production of Side by Side by Sondheim on the day of Trump's inauguration, and I remember sitting in the theater and feeling like it was the day of the Women's March. And I was like, I'm in tech for this play. I love Stephen Sondheim. I worship at the altar of Stephen Sondheim. And I was sitting in this theater just feeling like, what am I doing? Like, what am I doing? Like, during tech, I ordered like 4 graphic tees that were just like political statements, because I just felt, is this the thing an audience needs right now? Well, when we programmed it, we had no idea that was going to be the mood. We had no idea that like 3 days before we programmed we opened this play, that Donald Trump was going to be taking the oath of and that way in which art is catharsis of we go to see because we want to see ourselves. And we want to see ourselves reflected in a way that makes sense. And the art we consume is generally in the sense of, well, how does that relate to me? Yeah, we're as consumers, we are selfish. Like, I mean, that's part of the whole thing is we consume for us. But as art consumers, we are generally going to see art that reifies our worldview, and occasionally challenges us, but not in the ways that like really force us to make change. Like, that's not what we desire. And I think that what's been interesting in the last 2.5 years is that, well, the world is forcing us to confront ourselves on a daily basis. We have so much information that's accessible before we even like roll over in bed. Like we look at our phones and it's, here are the 75 horrific things that happened while you slept. And because this administration, but it's so easy to like put it onto it's just what's happening in America in our government, but there have always been awful things in the world, and we have such access to them now.
Mhm.
And so it feels like 10 things happen every day. 10 like horrific things that we should all be talking about. And then there's the question of, well, what's the hierarchy of things we should be talking about? Should we be talking about like what's going on in Bolivia? Should we be talking about Hong Kong? Should we be talking about
And
America?
then ultimately, what should our art be talking about, right?
Right.
In relationship to this mass media.
And with theater being such a long form art, how do you address anything in time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You know, like you write something and then, you know, and then all of a sudden you're performing it 3 days after the inauguration or
Mhm.
whatever, you know? It's,
And-
yeah.
And the
I think
irony
most
there,
art, too.
yeah, and the
That's-
irony there is that Redwood has been called a timely piece several times,
Yeah.
and so you know what does that mean? Like timely in what way?
I don't know. With all maximum respect and gratitude to the reviewers who use that in a kind way. I quibble with their use of the word timely, you know, in general as a culture. And I think
it's a buzzword.
Yeah, and it's a signifier of just.
Why
That's
does
a
it
lot
make
of
it better?
things.
Of mainstream.
Well, it's
yeah.
it's
And-
also become
It's a little lazy to me as a.
it's quite lazy because and the way that like diversity is also a buzzword of like
Right.
Yeah.
we're doing diverse work. Well, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, what does topical as applied to Redwood really mean? Because it's not like Ancestry.com is old now. Like, so.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just had a conversation around the like table with my family recently, like the other day. My grandma was talking about it, Ancestry.com and stuff. So
No,
I
we
don't know.
we are
It's
all.
there,
No, I mean
yeah.
like the genealogical explanation.
Sure.
I'm just.
yeah, I feel
making
you.
it
But you can
case
think
of a
about it,
point.
even like the
Yeah.
last 20 years is still recent as compared to
Sure.
all other history. But I think for me, what I always say is specifically about Redwood, but also some of the other shows that I've been a part of recently, is that as far as being an African American and having an African American experience within theater, we are now starting to control the narrative in a different way.
Mhm.
And one of the ways that we're using the narrative or using our power of the narrative is to talk about nuance within the Black community.
Yeah.
And that's what's timely about Redwood for me.
I love that.
Uh-huh.
And I feel like it's. But I guess it's too a question of like vessel, because when you have someone describing the play as timely, who may or may not have proven to have blind spots in general around, like, if I don't know, certain New York Times reviewers or whatever, the way they use the word universal
Yeah.
as like a descriptor or a non-descriptor of a play, it's like, but what do you really mean? when
But
you
I guess that
use-
gets to the core of like the theater and the theater critic of the time, the royal theater critic
Mhm.
of to use words like universal or timely is about catering to what the idea of the theater going audience is, which is ultimately 50s plus white with money. And so it's you do this quote unquote timely work by a black writer, and it's, well, how does that person feel? That average ticket buyer, how does it relate to them? Because ultimately we go to the theater to
Right.
have moments about ourselves.
Mm.
And so how do you ultimately, the critics are, as much as we like talk about like, oh, I hated that review was so harsh, the critics are also deeply invested in new work because that's what allows for critics to continue existing. Like, if there's no work, there are no critics. And so this timely thing is, how do you make the theater going, the theater review reading public, which is a homogenous group, feel like this work that I think the theater is doing right now, which is saying we want to explore a diverse group of voices. How we do that is a work in progress. We are continuing to figure out what happens when you bring people of color into historically white and still predominantly white spaces to do that work. How do you make a white audience feel like they're not only allowed to come in, but they're allowed to see themselves in it, because they haven't been taught that, which I think is the exact opposite of the experience of so many theater artists of color that I know, or really artists of color and people of color, in that the culture that, and I'm speaking particularly to an American culture. We grew up being told, well, you have to find yourself in works that don't reflect you. I remember I was 15 when Brokeback Mountain came out, and that felt very important as like a queer kid at an all-boys Catholic school in Missouri, being like, oh my God, there's this movie about queer experience, and that feels relevant to me. There is nary a person of color in that movie. But I saw so much of myself in a way in that film that it allowed me to feel like, oh, I'm not alone. And I think that most white audiences have not, save for really Raisin in the Sun and August Wilson, in the theater, they have not been taught, oh, that experience of that young Asian woman, that experience of that trans Indian man, that experience of that interracial couple. They have not been taught you can reflect yourself in that. You can see yourself in that. There are universal human truths that are being reflected, because for so long the idea has been, well, it's just going to be a white man or a white woman as the protagonist, and that's how you're going to see yourself. The work to see beyond, and also why I say particularly American is because race is so much a part of our vernacular that we have long been able to say, that's not my experience because that's not my racial experience.
Do you think the role of theater is changing to almost be, I don't want to say synonymous, but linked to identity? Like, do you think the role of theater is starting to become about talking about identity, as opposed to where it's been, which is, I mean, it's obviously storytelling, but do you think that now, I mean, obviously the time that we live in now is all about identity, but do you think that the role of theater is now to tell those stories?
The role of theater, that's such a meaty big one.
Yeah, it's general, but it's an idea I'm thinking of right now.
Yeah,
I guess for me, like, isn't that the role of not just theater but art in general, and what has always been?
But visual art's different and music's different, because they're allowed to be expressive in these ways that can be totally abstract or totally commercial, in ways where theater, when you go to see a play, you expect to have some sort of like we were talking about earlier, where the experience is going to have some sort of like intellectual tug on you. It's going to have an emotional tug on you. You expect to have it. You expect it to be kind of, I don't know. You expect the role of theater when you go to see a play to have some deep changing impact on you. People, like, they're seeing a play, if they're not seeing a musical that is about romance, they expect that they're going to leave the musical or the play specifically changed in some way. And nowadays it seems to be so tied to identity.
Well, I think as the panoply of people that we in the dominant culture rather decides to recognize as human has grown, then like necessarily there's a lot of ground to cover, right? There's like, I feel like a lot of art ambassadors from groups that have been historically disenfranchised in America are like, yeah, I am eager to tell my story, my ridiculous rom-com or my da-da-da-da, like, because for such a long time the landscape has looked a certain way. And so it's not that I feel like things are like racing to catch up to the dominant culture in this way, but like I feel like I definitely feel the urge as a creator to be like, no, I want to insist on my humanity and the I-ness of this story and these characters, like, as being the vessel for the story. I'm less interested in the idea play or the setting play, because the stories I haven't seen yet and the ones that I'm burning to tell have to do with like insisting on my own humanity still. So to that extent, I think, yes, it's a moment where meaningful, rigorous, interesting autobiography or autobiography adjacent work from groups of people is really exciting, and I think it's in vogue and cool to the extent that, whatever, that's dumb. But yeah, I don't know. I also think like I guess I'm struggling with the headiness of that one, because we still are in a, stories drive us still, right? And I guess when I get down to the meat of that question, it's like I as a writer don't I can't separate like character and story very easily. I think like the very good ones like do live in that I space, and they are driven by.
Is that what led to you playing the lead role in the play that you wrote?
No. Megalomania, you asked?
No, not Megalomania.
No,
but
no.
you know, you're talking about the I-ness of it, and it was obviously a very personal thing, and then you wrote it and
Well,
played
it's
the
thoughtful.
lead, and yeah.
I mean, I'd like to say that was part of my. Well, maybe, yeah.
But I think it also, like, having to make room for the fact that I think when I really think about the beauty of the moment in art that we're in, and I think the internet has a lot to do with it, I think just being aware of people is, for so long, the rule was you have to be one thing.
Mm-hmm.
In this capitalist society, you have to specialize in one thing and be that thing, and that's all you are. And, I mean, we live in a gig economy now, and most of us have gig upon gig upon gig.
You know, what's so interesting is people don't understand that's such a big generational divide. It's that we think about our lives in this kind of like eclectic way now that our parents just really didn't have to do.
I just did a science-themed birthday party for kids like 6 hours ago. So it's gig economy. You know what I mean?
I used to write ebook romance novellas. I was a shuffleboard instructor. I've been it's
The
ridiculous.
shuffleboard instructor? That's
Well, I worked at a shuffleboard bar, but my job
My
consisted
mom's
mostly
favorite
of
bar is
telling
a
people
shuffleboard bar now.
Oh my god!
In Cleveland, yeah. She's like, I love the shuffleboard bar.
Well, but I am still interested in what was it like to step into the role that you developed into May?
Totally, yeah. Well, it was really fun. It was really scary. It brought up a lot of like ego and frightening stuff around me, and I think I'm very glad for the opportunity. Increasingly more all the time, but. And I think I was right, but but it's made me more confident as an artist, and I think it's really a really cool thing for all hyphenate performers, if that's a proclivity that interests anybody, to have to go back into your work every single day and like justify to yourself, like, right, you built this, and this is what it's like to sit in it, and like this is what it's like to hear it every night.
Yeah.
And this line is like, maybe I'll cut that later, but like, no, I don't know. Learning how to live with both those heads on at the same time has been really fascinating.
Did you find yourself like cringing a lot during the process?
No, not
Really?
really. No. And this is something else I'll like kind of hippy dippily insist on. Like, for me, I am vibrating at such a neurotic pitch most of the time. Like, being able, like, to having two jobs that with both required so much and like demanded like establishing trust and love with all these like unique relationships that you build when you're in a cast and then when you're the director and when you're a playwright, like it was really helpful to me to be that busy too. Like that the way that my brain works, I was like, okay, I don't have any time to like really sit in my ego really, because I have to work physically all the time on both ends.
Yeah.
And this story is so personal, and it is so, I do believe, I mean, I only stepped into it initially because I think I wrote Meg in my voice, and I've told Chip and you this before, I think, but like I've heard really formidable people read that part and like they should do it later, and and I learned a ton. Amazing actors have done it, but I was like, I think like this, like I just
It's so fascinating because in the first workshop we did of this together, I insisted. I was like, I need you to be a writer.
Mhm.
I need you to be a writer. So
I'm glad you did.
And like the actor who did it, her name's Rihanna Wood. She's based in Kansas City as of today.
And she's so great, and
And
she should do this part someday.
She's
if she
so
wants
good.
to.
She should do this part. And I think we learned so much being able to be outside of it in that way. And so there was a different thing of I now laugh at it, but like the day that I saw the workshop in New York, where at the end of it I was like, so yeah, like you want to act in it too? That afternoon I had seen Heidi Schreck's What the Constitution Means to Me, and this idea of like performer playwright, like the power of watching a playwright perform their own work. And there's that question of like this moment being about identity. Well, I guess all art making has always been about identity. Like ultimately, if you make a piece of art, this is a thing that interests me, and it's some shit that I think is cool. Like, right? Like at the end of the day, that's why we make art. Like there's the question of like, and it's maybe important, sure. But
Right.
but ultimately it's like, this shit is really cool and interesting to me. And what's different and why I think we're talking about identity is because the people who are really the gatekeepers to the theater have predominantly looked a certain way. And now we're seeing a moment in which the art that is being created in this medium, the person creating it is changing.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, like, I don't need to make my work black because it's coming from me and I am black. Therefore, my blackness is embedded in the work. And so it's not that my work is all about my identity. It's rather that the people who are looking at it are saying, well, it was made by a black person. And so clearly their blackness has inspired it, which is not untrue because my experience as a black human walking around in America for the last 30 years influences everything I make.
Right. Another great moment was when Stevie in the show says that this is our particular blackness, which I feel like is such a powerful statement for such an, there's such a dynamic group of people, black people, and we are constantly either forced by culture into this monolith or we do it to ourselves. And so it's an interesting concept to present on stage to say, hey, like, blackness is different really based on your family, based on your identity, based on your experience of your blackness. It's not just, and the thing is Meg has blackness. She has these moments where she's like, my blackness represents itself in feeling this way about the way this napkin trash got put in my hand. That's a moment of me understanding my blackness.
But
the
also
world
to say,
puts it on you. Yeah.
But also to say that, like, Meg has blackness in every moment of her life because she's black.
Right. Exactly.
Like, the filter.
The thing that we
always
forget
on her,
about all different types of black people, like, and there's a lot of times you hear people say, "Oh, well, they're not black," or you could act black and all that.
I grew up embedded in that. Obviously,
we could have a whole 4-hour discussion on, like, being called an
Oreo
Oreo as a teenager,
right?
And what that means. And I think that something that's so particular about Redwood is that it's about a light-skinned black family.
Yeah, you said that, Phil. Yeah,
and that is. I think that the three of us have had many conversations
from the
about
East
like
Coast,
about like the particulars of growing up light skin and the privilege that comes with it, but also at the end of the day, you're still black.
Well, not just light skin, but a black family that moves through white spaces.
Yes,
which is
thank
also
you for that
interesting.
distinction.
Yeah, because there's another conversation you could have about the way people are relating to the play. Because I've heard from people, they're like, "Oh, it's a wonderful play, but why is everybody got to be light skinned?" And I'm like, "Oh, well, you just don't get it." And this is from black people, or
accident of casting.
But not an accident of casting. I think it's there's been so little room for nuance and understanding blackness,
and for a very good reason.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, we've had to make ourselves a monolith politically, and for all these reasons, because no one else has protected us.
How do you assemble? How do you organize?
You find your people? How do you signal to them? You do the nod. That's a dumb example.
But no. But then ultimately, there's a pressure put on work by artists of color because you can go see. I'm not going to name playwrights because that would be mean.
Yeah,
but
tacky.
you could go see a play by any white playwright writing right now, and there's no pressure on them to write about the white experience.
Yeah,
they're you are not going to go see that play and think, well, so and so had such an interesting take on whiteness.
No one will read it that way either. That's never been written in a review.
But you know what? I'm interested in that play. I think in this particular climate, because I think that even within Redwood, seeing this nuanced understanding of whiteness is interesting because then you get exactly the cellular pain of that experience. Whereas
I recommend Will Arbery on that point, but not that he needs any more blowing up,
but ultimately, like,
hey, Will.
What he's doing is like, in having seen one of his plays and heard a lot about the other one,
he's really wonderful. He's my friend. He's not listening to this anyway.
He might. Who knows? But like the play of his that I've seen, like, what it is it's going so far into one specific family's experience and how the privilege of whiteness affects that experience, and also the confines of whiteness affect that experience. And I think that what Redwood does so beautifully is to say, let's look at this family of a certain class, of a certain color, of a certain place on the black skin spectrum, and let's look specifically at them and their experience. And this is not a stand-in. It is not a stand-in for interracial relationships. It's not a stand-in for black experience. It's not the stand-in for the experience of 26-year-old women. It's not the stand-in experience for mothers who are finding themselves going through divorces. It's not the stand-in experience for a middle-aged gay black man who's trying to search for identity. It's about these specific people. But we've been trained to believe, well, we have to look for clues as to what they're saying about, like, it can't just be, this is a comment on Uncle Stevie and his experience of the intersectionality of queerness and blackness. This has to be a commentary on the intersectionality between queerness and blackness for all queer black men. And it's
a family.
Yeah.
It's
Stevie.
I wish for that more mundane.
And also the set of the play that we're sitting on right now, Brothers Paranormal, dove into that a bit with, Thai families and African American families, and in a similar way just told the story of a family, and you learned a lot along the way, especially from your culture outside of the culture that you're watching, but it wasn't, about that to a certain extent. So I think that as we move into these plays that are looking more into identity, and we have more of a acceptance of non-white families, we can learn a lot without having to say, well, what is it about this experience that is Thai, or what is it about the experience that is black? It's like, wow, look at this family. Because so many of the plays I've seen, those traditional modern American family dramas were interesting because they were looking at this weird fucking family, right?
I just taught a workshop on this, actually. I mean, thank you, PCS, for trusting me. But the only real gist and point of it that I wanted people to take away was just this specificity. That is I think that's just the secret, right?
I mean, that's what they tried to ram into our heads in college.
Yeah, but yet you get Crash winning the Oscar and shit sometimes. But it's just, no matter what you're attempting to do ever, it just behooves you to breathe life into your characters.
Yeah, that's great. Let's take a break here.
You can find Radical Listening from Virtual Sonic Reality on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. So find us on your favorite podcast app and hit subscribe to follow along. While you're there, why don't you just go ahead and give us 5 stars? You know you love us, and we love you too. So thanks for listening, and enjoy the show.
All right, time for headlines.
Headlines.
So,
everyone's favorite.
This is everyone's favorite part of the show.
Everyone's
where
so
we
scared about this part.
We get on the internet, get on Twitter and Reddit mostly, and find things that people are talking about, and we are going to bring them up and get your take.
What is Twitter?
It's something that Brittany knows a lot about.
Our president's real into it too.
Look, Phil Johnson live.
Yeah.
Branding.
So, the first headline. This one is a fun one. I just found this out a couple days ago. Netflix. So the headline reads, Netflix is testing a feature that lets you speed up boring episodes.
And to 1.5, baby.
Yeah. So basically, this new feature will let you speed up or slow down video playback. So you can like how you do podcasts sometimes or YouTube videos. You can now do that on Netflix for your TV shows. So you can get through The Office, the way it was intended.
You can skip a lot of the stuff before James Spader gets there, but after Michael leaves.
Or just speed him up.
I mean, I guess the strange thing, because trying to make the analog between, you can do it on podcasts, which, as someone who listens to a lot of podcasts, I love that feature.
Mm-hmm.
But the medium of podcasting is built knowing, someone's going to try to speed this up. That's...
Yeah, it's about information getting relayed versus a show where maybe they were thinking about things other than just pure information getting relayed, but maybe not.
Well, and I guess the thing of, so frequently with podcasts, this is not true of all podcasts, but so many of them are like this one, a group of awesome people just sitting around talking about shit.
Awesome.
And if you can digest that faster than we actually were able to formulate the thoughts and articulate them, good for you.
Yeah,
But-
ingest it.
But ultimately, like,
It's
if
good.
I'm making an episode of television is a very precise medium in terms of time.
Yeah.
Well,
Comedy,
and that's
like,
what I
it's all
heard is that,
timing.
you know, the people who are mad about it are mad that it's going to throw off comedic timing. It's going to throw off, you know.
Well, it ignores comedic timing because
Mhm.
ultimately the thing that's different between a filmed medium and a theatrical medium is the relationship to the audience.
Yeah.
And then I guess that's the thing you give up when you're making a film or making a visual medium is you're giving up the relationship between audience and performer. I think I saw It 2 a few months ago,
Mhm.
and like it's not a very good movie. And halfway through, I was like, I've been sitting here for an hour and 20 minutes, and I really need to pee, and I don't feel like I'm gonna miss anything if I go and pee, so I'm gonna go and pee. If I was seeing a play and we're at the hour 20-minute mark and I feel like I gotta pee, but maybe act 1's gonna be over in 20 minutes, I am far more likely to hold it and
Because people will
and
look at
navigate
you.
that.
I had that
It
at the Baltimore
depends.
Waltz the other day, but
Yeah.
I made it to the end. I was really proud of myself.
That's
because
great. It's hard nowadays.
It was hard.
Let me tell you, I do appreciate when a show has an intermission because I can't just sit there for a long time without having to pee. That's the main
Well
reason. Like, I
hydrated.
can totally see. And usually when I'm in a show, I'm like, no intermission, please. And I can make it through, no problem. But if I'm sitting there, I'm like, you know, if you're going to make me sit there more than 90 minutes, you're going to have to let me go somewhere.
Yeah,
You know,
Yes.
I'm
I
about an
hate
hour,
them
20
as a
minutes.
concept.
I mean,
we fought about
I
it.
understand.
We did not
We
fight, but we had
discussed
many
respectfully.
many respectful discussions.
No, but I'm like, I pee like 4 times during Act 1. I'm like, how dare I ask anybody?
But,
to
Yeah.
but I guess
Going.
because I just finished doing this workshop of a play by Carolee Corthron where it is a one act,
Mhm.
and decidedly that play, the container that it's in, it needs to be in a one act form. Like that,
Mhm.
the play cannot live without the one act form. And I think what was beautiful, because when we went into rehearsals, Redwood was a one act.
Mhm.
And I think what happened was the play revealed itself of, we actually do need that break.
Yeah.
We actually do need that time. You've put a lot of
I'm increasingly
large-
glad for it.
It
Yeah.
works
Yeah.
as it is. Like, I was like, oh, got it. I'm ready to pee. And like, oh, what's going to happen next?
Thank
But
you.
Give me 10 minutes.
Both of the reasons for intermission.
Well, and I guess it's also because there's so much meat in Act 2 that Act 1 clocks in at approximately 56 minutes. And if I have to, and Act 2 is approximately 56 minutes. Act 2 is approximately 52 minutes. Well, combined, that's 108 minutes. It's an hour 48. If that was one act, well, most people are going to have to pee at some point in that. And how much of it am I going to hear?
Yeah.
Where
It
the
does
meat is.
affect your experience.
And the first act feels like it flies by, and then I feel like if you lose the time, you lose that speed, you lose that tempo if you keep going. Because if you keep going, what happens is now I'm thinking about the play, I'm thinking about how long I've been here, I'm thinking about having to use the restroom. And so you lose that feeling of like, wow, that went really fast, and now I'm really interested to see what happens in Act 2 and da da da.
Yeah,
But I also am of the camp that movies need intermissions.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
I think everything
used to have
needs
them.
intermissions.
I saw for the 50th anniversary, I saw at Lincoln Center a screening of Ben-Hur, and they
Yeah.
honored the intermission.
Oh, yeah.
And it was like I went with a mentor of mine.
That's a long
and
movie, though.
we went and stood outside during the intermission. I was like, this is lovely.
Mm.
This is I got to go outside and see the sun before going back into another hour and 30 minutes of
Sound
a
of music.
fairly heavy movie. And
Gone with the Wind. You
Yeah,
can't see the face I'm making, but it was like
it was intense. Okay, great. So the next one, this headline, maybe you heard about this, but an artist hired hundreds for slave rebellion reenactment.
Oh, I did see this.
I did not see about this, but what?
Yes, so it was they reenacted the German Coast Uprising. It was the largest slave rebellion in history, and the artist's name is Dred Scott.
But with an A, right? Like dread.
Yeah, he hired 500 volunteers and period garb for a 26-mile march. Yeah, that was
Hired volunteers.
Well, or
So-
recruited.
Okay.
Yeah.
Again, I'm coming off of spending a week doing a workshop of a play that is about slavery over the course of 800 years, well into the future.
And this was literally happening kind of next door to you. Probably
Where
around the
was-
same time. I think this was in Louisiana.
Okay. And asking the question of, like, from the American vantage point, it's so easy to think of slavery as a thing that had a beginning and an ending. And there are over 21 million documented cases of slavery in the world today, in 2019.
Right.
But it just doesn't look... We have been brainwashed because the education system in this country is terrible, and because capitalism, into believing that slavery looks one very particular and specific way. And the innovation of slavery in the United States as it existed was, let's draw it across racial lines.
And and there's nothing about the story that we tell ourselves about the history of slavery helps us have a better conversation about it, because we completely neglect all of the types and forms of slavery that continue to exist, but that other people have lived through. Mm-hmm. We kind of like shun other ethnic groups and experience.
Black people, or
no, just our culture.
Oh, sure.
The way we talk about slavery based on the way that we have kind of formed this conversation about what slavery is. And it's really interesting because you'll hear from all kinds of people, especially like people who are like Eastern European or like, in all different types of places in the world who have histories of slavery. And the conversation whenever slavery comes up has almost been branded American slavery. And so it makes it so that we have a blind spot when we talk about slavery as it exists today. Mm-hmm. Slavery has always existed in this world. And it really isn't. It does a disservice, I think, to the conversation.
I think also that the fact they're doing a reenactment of a slave rebellion is really cool, because how many reenactments do you hear about Civil War reenactments? Mm-hmm. That's a whole thing people do.
So true, yeah.
And especially in the South where people, and so how do we, move this forward of a reenactment of what was the other struggles that were going on beyond just the Civil War, which was supposedly fought to free black people. Yeah. When there's a lot of other things going on.
Well, and it becomes this actual erasure of, to think that slavery, like, we are so privileged to think that slavery is about race because that's how it was in America. Slavery as an idea is about two things: power and commerce. That's what slavery is about. Yeah, race is just the very specific thing of, like, this. To say the Civil War
is the invention for justifying that it was about power and commerce.
Exactly. Right. Like, to say that the Civil War is about race is to misunderstand the Civil War entirely. Yeah. However, at least my experience was, I was taught the Civil War was fought over slavery. Right. And it took me years before I was like, oh no, actually, this is what it is, and these are Lincoln's complicated thoughts about slavery. And
conversation.
Who said the Civil War is about race? Weird.
Oh, people
or
say
slavery.
That.
I mean, just in
No, but that's a frustrating conflation. Cause...
because it misunderstands what was actually happening in this country.
Yeah.
And race is an invention, like, almost after the fact of the Civil War.
Yeah. It was kind of solidified during Jim Crow, really.
Yeah. Look at Black Reconstruction, yo.
Yeah, and I mean, to show...
What's that?
A reenactment of a slave rebellion is to show that, change happened not just because of a governmental change, but because, people rose up in a violent uprising.
Yeah.
It all over, it's about the people who were enslaved taking back their...
Yeah, you'll appreciate that, because still a lot of the narrative does seem to be like John Brown and like, Harriet Beecher Stowe.
I mean, we're in a moment in which...
But don't get it twisted.
We have a film and
a
major motion picture in theaters that reimagines Harriet Tubman as a magical Negro who
I was hearing about this movie.
Have you seen this
Tommy
already?
Codes to Bed.
Oh, I have no desire to see that movie. I have no desire to like
Yeah, I had a friend who saw it recently and
see
yeah,
like
yeah.
the Hidden
Yeah,
Figures
that-
version of Harriet Tubman's life. Like
Hidden Figures was nice. That was like a fun mom.
no, but ultimately Hidden
movie.
Figures is speaking to a specific time and a specific idea and doing a thing.
Yes.
That if you know anything about Harriet Tubman's life,
I don't know.
and-
I'm gonna go on record and saying that Hidden Figures is not good.
Oh no. I think Hidden Figures is a great
Partial.
movie, and I think that Hidden Figures has easy politics.
Yeah,
Yes.
And I think that
That's good.
you
Yeah,
have
well
to
put.
you have to divide those two things. Of as audiences, we are much more interested in easy politics than
Well, yeah,
than
it goes
quality.
back to what you were saying before about this question of audience and like what the gesture is to soothe or make palatable or to make any kind of art that like allows people to come to it and sit and be like, well, that is safely other from me, yet I may congratulate myself on being here to experience it. So even if it's like something as radical and wild as like Harriet Tubman's life, if you can go and be a person in the audience who's like, yes, well done, yes, like that. That's a shame somehow.
when like the reality is like
There's nothing to do with me.
yes. She
Yeah,
was
right?
a powerful woman.
Yeah, like she should be on the $20 bill.
glass ceiling bursted by Harriet Tubman. I mean, it's like
But you know, there's something just to make this connection. You talk about cellular memory. Like, there's just something interesting about, and I've been having this conversation lately about Black suffering and how it seems to be bubbling kind of like in culture. And so the fact that we have the slave rebellion happening and movies like Harriet and stuff like that, there's still this kind of like, you know, it's almost like Alameda is still speaking. You know, in some ways she's like, no, I'm not done. Like, this conversation's not over. And I'm, you know, the fact that people are taking time out of their day to go and do a slave rebellion is massive.
Yeah, yeah.
And I guess at the end of the day, like, white people have been making shitty art about white people for a really long time. Like, my first thought is like that stupid LBJ movie of like, who cares? Who cares? But like, ultimately, because of the structure of a biopic, he has to be the hero, and we're going to make a movie that crafts him as the hero of this.
Yeah.
And it's that same formula
He was racist.
that's being used to make a Harriet Tubman biopic, because it's
Right. And
it's
like, how
ultimately
deep
not
are they
about-
going to actually tell? Like, are they going to tell everything about LBJ? No. And there's so much.
They're
They're
gonna-
mind
bankrolled
work.
by his
they're going to tell the
library.
things that ultimately, at the end of the movie, you can say,
Yeah,
I'm patting
he was
myself
a
on the
great
back right now.
president.
great job, me, for
Yeah.
engaging with this story. Like, that's the point of a biopic, is of like thinking of like Tina opened on Broadway this week.
Yeah.
And like, the story of Tina Turner is one of triumph, but to go back through her catalog and say, how do we reappropriate these songs?
Yeah, how do we remove her humanity?
Well, when
narrative
people
arc.
are living too, or when their very recent descendants have a lot
Yeah.
of creative control over whatever art is being made about them, I do think that is a big influencing factor. Like, I'm sure no one's gonna write, like, I'm hard pressed at just this moment to think of the example of the hard hitting biopic about a person who's around.
But I even think about
Yeah.
like,
Judy.
I mean,
Well, it's like
we
that
could have a
Wu-Tang
whole
biopic
podcast
that
about
we've
Judy.
got.
Oh
But-
yeah, we could talk about Wu-Tang.
We could talk
Judy,
about- but we could
somewhere
talk about,
between them, we all meet.
Yeah,
Lincoln,
Lincoln.
of like, ultimately from moment one announces itself as important.
Mhm.
And that's the whole reason you see Lincoln.
Lincoln is
which
like
is
the Joe Biden of movies.
Lincoln, which is a very long, boring movie that I fell asleep in the theaters the first time I saw it.
Nah, I'm never gonna see Lincoln. Why did you go see Lincoln?
Because
I
we
fell
want to
asleep
feel
to
good
Lincoln
about
once.
ourselves.
Go see Lincoln if like my uncle and I like had to bond because like a tragedy was happening and we weren't like there at the hospital.
Yeah.
I don't know. Whatever.
Great. Let's move on to plugs.
All right.
Yeah. So this is a section where we plug things that we want people to see or know about, and so yeah, what's going on?
Well, the sad thing of making theater is that when you get to the point of it where you're like, oh, it's about to happen, you don't get to see any other
else.
theater.
Or think about, what am I going to see?
So all of the plays that I've loved in the last couple of months that I would love to plug are closed. But I'll say, like, things I've really loved in the last few months are Complex.
Thank you.
Were you in that?
Yeah, I was in the... Yeah.
Oh my god!
For
I'm
a
so
little
bummed I
while.
missed it.
Just a little while. It
I
was
know
a fun
Dominic.
time.
Oh my god!
Oh, cool. Yeah. Well, I'm doing his next play here in
Dope.
February, so yeah.
That's so cool.
Come back to Portland.
Come back tomorrow. Hey.
I love the Baltimore Waltz at Profile.
I wish I had seen that.
I continue to think about, with grand frequency, the Bacchae at Shaking the Tree.
You got to see that? It was so good.
Yeah, we saw it together.
Yeah.
So good.
And just thinking about, like, particularly those last 20 minutes and what happens when you wake up from the thing that you've been seduced by. And when you have to see the actual blood on your hands and your body, and like, oh my god, I've been ignorant of this thing because I've worshipped at the altar of this idol, and thinking about, like, what idols are we worshiping and how does that affect us?
I went out in a dress for the first time directly after seeing that play, because it was Halloween. I didn't have a costume, and my girlfriend was like, what about putting on a dress and some makeup? And I was like, you know what? Yes.
Pics or it didn't happen.
Those pics are some messy pics, let me tell you.
And not selfishly, but I always want to support the company that employs me, and I love working for PCS, and so we are about, after Thanksgiving, to begin performances of Miss Bennett, Christmas at Pemberley, directed by Marissa Wolf, sound designed by Phil Johnson.
There's some
dope actors in it,
and some really dope actors and collaborators on that one. And then after that, beginning performances December 28th, PCS is doing a production of Hedwig and the Angry Inch, which some fool named Chip Miller is directing, and I think it will be a really fun time.
Great.
God, beautiful.
Which of your romance novels should we read?
Okay. Yeah, I always sort of resent bringing that up to myself. I don't think you should read any of them. It's really... because it's not very good writing. Like, I was writing very fast to make money.
I have a friend who does a audiobook of lesbian erotica as one of her side hustles. And that sounds like the most fun.
Good
I'm
work.
like, let me
Yeah, I
find
never
something
got to
like
do
that.
an LGBT when I was pitching them all the time, but I had a
Yeah.
very staid and sort of conservative publisher, and so they're like a
Conservative
quarterback
erotica.
bait. It's...
Okay.
I'm sorry.
What is the pen name for this? Like, what do you...
Are you going to give that up?
Celia Loren or Abriella Blake.
Ooh!
Are under 2 names.
Also
love
known
those
as
names.
How I Lost a Night of My Life, because all I'm going to do when I get home is read all of it.
No, but I really don't want you to because of the writing. Like, if I felt better... Like, I was writing these
We
so
all
fast.
saw Redwood, so we know you can
wish I could
write. Don't worry.
No,
We're going
but,
to
like,
enjoy
I want to see
ourselves.
what you do for money.
Yeah.
God.
That's
I don't
hilarious.
know.
Do you have anything else to plug?
Oh, man. Well, so many things probably, but what came to mind are 2 books that I've loved and keep giving to people periodically. Heads of the Colored People, the short story collection by Nafisa Thompson Spears. I give it to you. No pressure. Read it whenever you want to.
It's
But
in my bag.
it's so good. She's amazing. And, like, it's relevant to our discussion today about, like, you know, blackness not being a monolith.
Yeah.
That Key and Peele sketch. Anyway, it's funny and it's wild and it's humane and kaleidoscopic, and it's a book I keep coming back to in my head. This essay collection, Thick, by Tressie McMillan Cottom. I don't know how to pronounce your last name actually, but it's a really succinct, cool, hard look at race in America from like a very smart, amazing woman's perspective. And it's the kind of essay collection you read where it's like, oh, I knew all of this, but this is the perfectly phrased version, and like it feels so good to have it spoken out loud. I think it's a great book. And Trick Mirror by Gia Tolentino.
I was about to I bought it today
Oh,
because on your
yes!
recommendation, and I read The Iron Internet
Okay,
tonight
cool.
before I came here, and I can't wait to read more.
I'm a fan. I think she's a lady who's really got her finger on like how this current generational head has been malformed by social media, and love that. Yeah, so I do recommend that book, and I think it's a good conversation starter and good fuel for the philosophical fire.
It is.
And Heroes of the Fourth Turning at Playwrights Horizons is beautiful. It's running through November. That's the last play I saw other than, I don't know, all the plays you mentioned, which I heartily echo.
That we went to see together.
Yeah, and Macbeth at PCS.
Yeah, I heard good stuff.
Oh, we're in the theater.
Yeah. Sorry.
It's a
everyone.
podcast studio right now.
That's why
You're good.
he didn't mention it until now because part of me knew that.
But let me say that people were just like tossing that word around during our process. I was like, God.
Can we not, please?
Having just been in Orlando where they're also doing a production of Mackers, the superstition around saying it in that building.
People slap you. Orion's like, I'm going to cut you with his face.
People are serious about that.
I heard there's a dispensation if the production is being done in the building.
I fully believe if there's a production being done in the building,
but do you have to be involved with the production?
If you're in the building,
Mackers
you're
is
involved
confusing.
with it.
Yeah.
It's a confusing
Just
thing.
always
I had to
say
explain
the
it to some
Scottish
high
play.
school students recently.
Scottish
I'm like,
play.
you know.
I mean, superstitions
And
are
like,
bullshit, but
I don't know. He didn't. I'm not afraid of him. Like, the witches and the concept of fate and like malformed destiny are stirring. That dude himself isn't that scary to me.
No,
His
it's more
wife,
about the
maybe.
fly rail dropping
Oh,
and lights.
I suppose that's the thing. I would also be remiss without mentioning a chapbook of poetry called A Year in Loss and Faggotry
Oh my God,
by
I'm so
T.S.
sad you said
Leonard.
Oh, nice.
That I think we've both read.
Yes,
That
it's beautiful.
I read it twice on an airplane last night and was like openly sobbing on the plane of just a deep look at what it is to be alive in 2019 and grappling with love and loss and responsibility. And I find it to be a really, really beautiful collection of poems about being a human.
Great.
I'm gonna plug some friends of mine just started running something called the Curious Cabaret. There's some good clown friends of mine known as A Little Bit Off, and they just started doing a monthly show last month, which I didn't get to catch, but they're doing it the third Sunday of every month. So they're gonna have the No November version on Sunday, the November 17th. And that should be cool. And then in December, whatever day that is, I'm going to be doing some science tricks live at Curious Cabaret. So come by and check it out. Watch me put an egg in a bottle.
Oh, shit.
There you go.
Third Sunday in December.
Third Sunday in December.
I
Whatever
will
that
be
is.
here, and
I
I
will
will.
move here. I
What
wanna see
time?
that.
8 p.m.
Oh,
Sundays
perfect.
at Curious Comedy, which is down on MLK Northeast somewhere.
I
Yeah.
will. I'm gonna try to go.
I'll
to
let
that.
you know.
I just want to mention that the Brothers Paranormal at Coho Theater will be running this weekend. It closes this weekend, so if you can come see it, definitely see it.
Closes
It was
on
a
the
wonderful
18th.
play. Yeah, it
Yeah.
closed on the 18th. I also want to give a shout out to Sold, which is a Vanport Mosaic production directed by Damaris Webb, and that starts on Wednesday and runs for 10 days. So if you get a chance to see, I honestly think that Sold is a great compliment to Redwood. So if you've seen Redwood, Sold does a pretty good job of
Sold.
Sold
S-
SOULD.
Oh,
Sold.
okay. With like a
I'm seeing
An
both.
apostrophe,
with
I'm
apostrophe.
seeing both of them this week, and I
Great.
cannot wait.
So yeah, I think that they complement each other in really nice ways, and Damaris does lovely work, so definitely see that as well. And I just want to thank you guys again for coming on the show.
Can we just keep doing this? This has been so
Come
much
back
fun.
some-
We can do it with
Yeah.
the mics turned off.
But that's no fun because
Hello, how
we're the
lucky we are
millennials.
to
We
be
have to leave a
alive right
mark.
That's
now.
true. Let's live stream next time.
didn't happen.
It is fun. I'm like imagining people listening to it.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
Oh, I'm just going to
Congrats
listen
on
to
your beautiful
this on
podcast. Thanks
repeat.
for having me.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much for coming, you guys.
Yeah, this has
so
been
good.
This has been
It's fun to
fantastic.
be in the theater.
So
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Legit.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
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 Thank you for listening to this episode of Radical Listening. If you have questions or would like to reach out, feel free to reach out to our email, which is radicallisteningpodcast@gmail.com, or visit the Coho Theater website for more information. And thanks for listening.